first drops came soft and lazy, tapping on the rusted tin roof of Jack Nolan's old Chevy. He didn't pay them much mind. In Montana, spring storms had a way of rolling in without warning and rolling out just as quick. But tonight felt different. There was a weight in the air. Thick, electric, almost like the valley itself was holding its breath. Jack leaned back in the driver's seat, eyes fixed on the distant ridgeline. The sky was turning the color of bruised plums, and the wind had picked up. Static hummed from the radio, then the sheriff's voice cut in, sharp and urgent. Flash flood warning for Driftwood Valley. All residents seek high ground immediately. Repeat. Jack reached forward and snapped it off. He didn't need a reminder. He'd seen the river rise before, but never like this. Not since that summer. He clenched the wheel tighter than necessary, his knuckles bone white. It had been 3 years since he left the fire department. 3 years since the blaze in West Elk. Since the last scream, since Anna. Outside, the rain shifted from a steady pour to a torrential downpour, smearing the windshield in sheets. The road ahead disappeared into a blur of water and gravel. He shifted the truck into gear, tires grinding through the mud. He just wanted to make it home, that's all. Just his cabin, his silence, and the bottle of bourbon waiting on the counter. No rescues, no sirens, no more damn heroics. But as he rounded the bend near the old Bennett Bridge, something caught his eye, something thrashing in the water. At first, he thought it was a tree limb caught in the current, but then it moved, deliberately. A powerful leg kicked above the surface, a head lifted, nostrils flaring. A horse, a black Mustang. Jesus, Jack breathed, slamming the truck to a stop. The rain battered the hood like a war drum. The Mustang was caught in the current, its sleek body twisting, hooves striking out blindly. He recognized it, Shadow, the wild one. Locals swore he was uncatchable, unbreakable. He'd escaped roundups, jumped fences, vanished into the timber like a ghost. And now, he was dying. Jack's hands tightened around the wheel. Every instinct in him screamed to look away, to keep driving. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't a rescuer anymore. He wasn't anything. The Mustang's head went under. Jack cursed out loud, grabbed the gear shift, and jammed the truck into reverse. Gravel spun. He backed onto the shoulder, yanked the door open, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a slap. The water on the ground was already ankle-deep, racing toward the river like it had somewhere to be. He stumbled forward, boots sinking into the saturated earth. "You're a damn fool," he muttered to himself as he pulled a coil of rope from the truck bed. But his legs kept moving. Down at the riverbank, the current was a living thing, roaring, angry, hungry. Shadow was still fighting, but barely. His movements were sluggish, panicked, desperate. Jack didn't think. He ran straight in. The water surged up to his waist, nearly sweeping his legs out from under him. He gritted his teeth, braced against the current. One wrong step and he'd be dragged down too. "Easy," he said. Not sure if he was talking to the horse or himself. Shadow's ears flicked. The Mustang's eyes locked onto his for a split second, wild and terrified. Jack took another step. Then Shadow kicked. It wasn't intentional, more of a flailing last-ditch effort, but the blow caught Jack square in the ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. He gasped, lost his footing, and the river took him. Cold, black water swallowed him whole. He tumbled head over heels, mouth open in a silent scream, lungs begging for air. Debris smacked into him, branches, rocks, something metal. He didn't know up from down. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. But something in him refused. Number. Not like this. His hand shot out, fingers clawing for anything solid, and found it. A rope, a piece of fencing, half submerged and tangled around a tree. He seized it, yanking himself up just enough to get his head above water. Gasping, spitting, he spotted the Mustang, still there, still fighting. "Not today," Jack growled. His ribs screamed with every movement, but he pushed forward. He got his arms around Shadow's neck, the Mustang lashing in panic before going limp. Exhaustion had taken over. The fight was gone. Jack wrapped the rope around them both, gritted his teeth, and began to pull. He didn't know how long they fought like that. Minutes, maybe hours. His muscles burned. His breath came in ragged gasps. But eventually, mercifully, they slammed against something solid, a massive oak, half submerged, its roots clawing through the mud like fingers. Jack dragged Shadow onto the roots, collapsing beside him. The horse let out a soft, broken sound, then stilled, his black coat slick and shivering. They lay there, man and beast, soaked, bruised, broken, but alive. Jack let his head rest against the trunk of the tree. The storm howled around them, but in that moment there was only the sound of two hearts still beating. He didn't know why he jumped in, didn't know why he cared. But as he reached out and rested a trembling hand on Shadow's neck, the horse didn't flinch. And that was something. The cold was everywhere. It wrapped around Jack like a second skin, clawing through his soaked clothes, burying itself into the marrow of his bones. Every breath felt like shards of glass stabbing his lungs. He wasn't sure how long they'd been lying there. Minutes, maybe more, but the storm hadn't let up. Rain pounded the river's surface in relentless waves, the current still raging all around them. Shadow wasn't moving. Jack pushed himself upright, wincing as his ribs flared with pain. His shirt clung to his skin, ripped at the shoulder. Blood mixed with mud streaked down his arm from where a broken branch had raked him. But it wasn't his own injuries he was thinking about. It was the horse lying half-submerged beside him. Shadow's sides rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. His legs twitched slightly, more reflex than intention. The gleam in his eyes from earlier was gone, replaced by a distant fog. "Come on, big guy," Jack muttered, voice hoarse. "Don't quit on me now." The wind ripped through the trees like a scream, and another surge of water slammed against the oak's trunk, jostling them both. Jack looked around. No lights, no rescue teams. Just darkness, rising water, and nowhere safe in sight. If they stayed here, they'd freeze, or worse, get pulled right back into the river the next time it surged. He scanned their surroundings. A broken fence snaked its way through the water nearby, the strands of barbed wire tangled and half-buried in mud. An idea sparked, desperate, maybe stupid, but it was all he had. He crawled toward it, fingers numb, each movement sending knives through his ribs. He wrapped his hands around a long stretch of wire and began twisting. It sliced into his palms, but he kept going, fashioning a crude harness, enough to wrap around Shadow's chest without cutting off his air. As he worked, the Mustang let out a weak breath, nostrils flaring once before going still again. "You're not going down like this," Jack said, teeth chattering. "Not after all that fight." When he was done, he dragged himself back to Shadow, muscles screaming. He slipped the wire loop under the horse's soaked body, bracing his foot against a submerged root for leverage. The wire bit into his hands as he pulled it tight, but not too tight. Just enough to give him something to hold on to, something to drag the horse with. He sat back for a second, blinking against the rain. His hands trembled uncontrollably, but he couldn't stop now. "Okay, Shadow," he said softly. "Time to move." The horse didn't respond. Jack gritted his teeth and pulled on the makeshift lead. Shadow's muscles twitched. One leg shifted slightly, then sagged again. Jack leaned close, his voice barely more than a whisper. I know you've got nothing left. I know what that feels like. But you're not alone, not this time. He pulled again, harder. Shadow's hooves scraped against the submerged roots. A low grunt escaped the horse's throat. His ears flicked. That was all Jack needed. He stood, swaying, his boots sinking into the mud. The current tugged at him, begging him to sit back down and let go. But he planted his feet, locked both hands around the wire, and pulled. Shadow's massive body shifted, slowly, painfully. His front legs slid over the roots, his hindquarters following an inch at a time. Jack walked backward, step by step, dragging the Mustang with him. When Shadow finally rolled off the roots and into shallower water, he let out a rough, rasping snort. Jack collapsed beside him, gasping. The rain showed no signs of mercy. Through the sheets of downpour, Jack saw something up ahead. A small rise, a barely there patch of high ground covered in scrub and rock. It was maybe 100 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. Still, it was something. The only something. He took another look at Shadow. The Mustang was shivering, but conscious. His legs kicked weakly, his head bobbing. His body trembled, too exhausted to stand. But his eyes met Jack's. There was still life there. Let's go, Jack whispered. Let's finish this. He braced himself and began dragging again, one step, then another. Every muscle in his body protested. The wire cut deeper into his skin, and his ribs screamed every time he twisted. But the thought of stopping never crossed his mind, not anymore. They trudged forward, a man and a wild horse, tethered by desperation and a thin, rusted strand of wire. Halfway to the rise, the current surged again. A wall of water slammed into them, knocking Jack sideways. He hit the ground hard, his chest erupting in pain. For a moment, everything went black. Then he heard it, Shadow's terrified whinny. Jack forced himself up, coughing water from his lungs. The wire lead had gone slack. Shadow was on his knees, legs folded beneath him, head slumped. No, no, Jack muttered. He stumbled back over, gripped the wire, and pulled with everything he had. Get up, he growled through clenched teeth. You don't get to die on me. Not after this. Shadow groaned. His legs shifted, his body trembled. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he rose. Jack's breath caught. He stared, chest heaving, as the Mustang stood on all fours, swaying but upright. You son of a gun, he whispered, half in awe, half in disbelief. They kept going, inch by inch, Jack leading, Shadow following, until at last, miraculously, they reached the rise. It wasn't much, just a patch of gravel and weeds, barely wide enough for both of them. But it was dry. It was out of the water. Jack collapsed on his side, not even bothering to pull the wire from his hands. He could feel every heartbeat in his body, every throb in his ribs. Shadow let out a long, shaky breath and dropped beside him. The rain still poured. The river still roared. But for the first time since the storm began, they weren't sinking. They were alive. Jack turned his head toward the Mustang. Shadow was lying motionless, his body heaving, eyes closed, but his ears flicked once, faintly. That was enough. Jack exhaled, slow and steady, letting his eyes drift shut. The fight wasn't over, not even close, but for now, they'd made it through. Morning came without sunlight. The sky was a dull steel gray, the kind that made it impossible to tell what time it was. The rain had slowed to a fine mist, but the river still raged like an angry beast, its swollen current tearing through everything in its path. Trees that had stood for decades now floated like driftwood. Fences, sheds, Even pieces of someone's front porch spun helplessly in the surge. On a narrow sliver of high ground, Jack Nolan opened his eyes. He wasn't sure what woke him, the wind, the cold, or the pain. Every part of his body ached. His ribs throbbed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and his hands were stiff, bloody, and cut raw from the makeshift lead still wrapped around Shadow's chest. The Mustang lay beside him, shivering. Jack turned his head slowly, wincing as his neck cracked. Shadow's breathing was ragged, but steady. His black coat was caked with mud and flecked with dried blood from where debris had struck him. One of his ears twitched. His eyes, still half-lidded, found Jack's. They were both still alive, but not for long if they stayed here. Jack pushed himself upright with a grunt, one hand clutching his side. The sky stretched out in all directions, and with it, a vast expanse of floodwater. The valley was gone. In its place was a massive inland sea. About a quarter-mile away, maybe less, was Salvation, a small rise, higher ground that hadn't been swallowed up. It was still intact, with a few shrubs clinging to its flanks like survivors on a lifeboat. Jack stared at it, then looked down at Shadow. "You think we've got one more in us?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. Shadow didn't respond. Jack reached for the wire lead, checking the knots and harness. It had held so far, but now the final test loomed, dragging a half-dead Mustang through water deeper and faster than anything they'd crossed yet. He stood, every muscle screaming in protest. "All right, we're doing this. Together." He gave a tug on the lead. Shadow groaned, his front hooves shifting in the mud. His legs shook violently as he attempted to rise. Jack braced, pulling with everything he had. "Come on," he gritted. "You stood once, you can do it again." Shadow's knees buckled. But then, with one final effort, he shoved himself up. He swayed, but didn't fall. "That's it," Jack breathed. "That's my boy." With the current swirling around their legs, Jack led the way, each step a battle. The river's pull was stronger now, more desperate, like it knew this was their escape and it wasn't ready to let them go. Water reached Jack's waist, then his ribs. His boots slipped over unseen rocks and roots. Every so often, he'd feel something bump against his leg, a floating branch, a chunk of debris, and his heart would seize, fearing the worst. Shadow stumbled behind him. Twice, Jack had to turn and brace the horse's body with his own, keeping him upright. They were halfway there when the water shifted. A deep, low roar echoed through the valley, and suddenly a wave surged forward, sweeping them sideways. Jack fell first. He hit the water hard, shoulder first, and for a moment he lost grip of the lead. Shadow went down too, his legs folding as the current yanked them apart. Jack's head dipped beneath the surface. He fought his way up, sputtering, eyes darting. "Shadow!" he yelled. He caught a glimpse. Black fur, limp and floating, eyes closed. The Mustang was underwater. "No, no, hell no!" Jack dove. The cold was like 1,000 knives. His arms cut through the water blindly, searching. Then, fur. He latched on, wrapping both arms around Shadow's neck. The horse was unconscious. Dead weight. Jack kicked, teeth clenched, lungs burning. He broke the surface with a gasp, dragging Shadow's head above the water. "Breathe, damn you," he muttered, coughing. They were close now, 20 feet from the rise. Jack kicked harder, feeling the last reserves of strength leave him. 10 feet, 5. His boots scraped something solid, rock. With a strangled cry, he pulled them both up onto the bank, collapsing beside the horse. The river clawed at their legs like it was begging them back, but they didn't move. Jack rolled to his side, coughing hard, tasting blood. Beside him, Shadow gave a sudden wet cough. Jack laughed, part relief, part madness. "You stubborn bastard," he said, voice shaking. "You really don't know how to quit, do you?" Shadow's eyes fluttered open. Jack lay there for a moment, too exhausted to move, soaked to the bone and shaking violently. But they'd done it. They had escaped the worst. The wind blew harder now, but the rain had thinned. The storm was finally starting to pass. He turned to the Mustang again. Shadow was still breathing, chest rising and falling slowly, rhythm returning to his body. The flick of his ears, the twitch in his tail, the faint life returning to those wild eyes. Jack pushed himself up onto one elbow. "You're not just some wild horse anymore," he said. "You're mine now, whether you like it or not." Shadow snorted, barely audible, but it was enough. Jack rested a hand on the horse's shoulder, and for the first time, Shadow didn't flinch. He leaned into it, just a little. That was all Jack needed. They lay there together, both broken, both alive. And somewhere in that brokenness, something new was taking root. A beginning. Jack reached for the wire lead, checking the knots and harness. It had held so far, but now the final test loomed. Dragging a half-dead Mustang through water deeper and faster than anything they'd crossed yet. He stood, every muscle screaming in protest. "All right, we're doing this. Together." He gave a tug on the lead. Shadow groaned, his front hooves shifting in the mud. His legs shook violently as he attempted to rise. Jack braced, pulling with everything he had. "Come on," he gritted. "You stood once, you can do it again." Shadow's knees buckled. But then, with one final effort, he shoved himself up. He swayed, but didn't fall. "That's it," Jack breathed. "That's my boy." With the current swirling around their legs, Jack led the way, each step a battle. The river's pull was stronger now, more desperate. Like it knew this was their escape and it wasn't ready to let them go. Water reached Jack's waist, then his ribs. His boots slipped over unseen rocks and roots. Every so often, he'd feel something bump against his leg, a floating branch, a chunk of debris, and his heart would seize, fearing the worst. Shadow stumbled behind him. Twice, Jack had to turn and brace the horse's body with his own, keeping him upright. They were halfway there when the water shifted. A deep, low roar echoed through the valley, and suddenly a wave surged forward, sweeping them sideways. Jack fell first. He hit the water hard, shoulder first, and for a moment he lost grip of the lead. Shadow went down too, his legs folding as the current yanked them apart. Jack's head dipped beneath the surface. He fought his way up, sputtering, eyes darting. "Shadow!" he yelled. He caught a glimpse. Black fur, limp and floating, eyes closed. The Mustang was underwater. "No, no, hell no!" Jack dove. The cold was like 1,000 knives. His arms cut through the water blindly, searching. Then, fur. He latched on, wrapping both arms around Shadow's neck. The horse was unconscious. Dead weight. Jack kicked, teeth clenched, lungs burning. He broke the surface with a gasp, dragging Shadow's head above the water. "Breathe, damn you," he muttered, coughing. They were close now, 20 feet from the rise. Jack kicked harder, feeling the last reserves of strength leave him. 10 feet, 5. His boots scraped something solid, rock. With a strangled cry, he pulled them both up onto the bank, collapsing beside the horse. The river clawed at their legs like it was begging them back, but they didn't move. Jack rolled to his side, coughing hard, tasting blood. Beside him, Shadow gave a sudden wet cough. Jack laughed, part relief, part madness. "You stubborn bastard," he said, voice shaking. "You really don't know how to quit, do you?" Shadow's eyes fluttered open. Jack lay there for a moment, too exhausted to move, soaked to the bone and shaking violently. But they'd done it. They had escaped the worst. The wind blew harder now, but the rain had thinned. The storm was finally starting to pass. He turned to the Mustang again. Shadow was still breathing, chest rising and falling slowly, rhythm returning to his body. The flick of his ears, the twitch in his tail, the faint life returning to those wild eyes. Jack pushed himself up onto one elbow. "You're not just some wild horse anymore," he said. "You're mine now, whether you like it or not." Shadow snorted, barely audible, but it was enough. Jack rested a hand on the horse's shoulder, and for the first time, Shadow didn't flinch. He leaned into it, just a little. That was all Jack needed. They lay there together, both broken, both alive. And somewhere in that brokenness, something new was taking root. A beginning. Between the two of them, they cleaned Shadow's wounds, changed bandages, and eased his breathing with antibiotics she'd brought from the mobile wildlife unit. At dusk, as the sun finally broke through the clouds for the first time in 2 days, Ellie stood at the edge of the barn, arms crossed. "He should be moved to a rescue center," she said softly. "We can monitor him properly. He'll get round-the-clock care." Jack shook his head. "No." "You sure? You don't look like you're in much shape to be running a rehab." "I'm not," he said, eyes fixed on Shadow. "But he's not just a rescue case." Ellie studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Okay." That night, Jack stayed beside Shadow again. He watched the horse sleep, watched his sides rise and fall, and for the first time in years, he let his guard down. Memories of Anna crept in. Her laugh, the way she used to sit on the porch and brush her hair at dusk. He hadn't saved her. But this time, maybe he did something right. Just before dawn, Shadow stirred. Slowly, weakly, the Mustang pushed himself onto his side. Jack reached out without thinking, and Shadow leaned in, not out of fear, out of trust. Something shifted in Jack's chest, not a jolt, not a spark, just a slow, warm thaw. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. A week passed, and the floodwaters slowly receded, leaving behind a valley scarred and silent. Jack Nolan stood on the porch of his cabin, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented tin mug. The smell of wet earth and charred wood clung to everything. The barn was half collapsed, fences torn out of the ground, and debris littered the property like forgotten memories. But Jack didn't see ruin when he looked out over the land. He saw a beginning. Behind him, inside the open barn doors, Shadow stood, thin, bruised, but stronger than he'd been in days. He was eating slowly from a bucket of soaked oats, his dark eyes steady, alert. He flinched less now when Jack approached. He no longer fought the halter or bolted when wind rustled the tarp. The wildness was still there. It always would be. But now it was tempered with something else. Trust. Jack never said it aloud, but every time he saw that look in Shadow's eyes, it anchored him. It reminded him why he was still breathing. Late that morning, a silver truck rumbled down the gravel road. Jack stepped off the porch just as it came to a stop near the mailbox. Ellie Hayes climbed out, clipboard in hand again, but her posture was different this time. Less official, more personal. "Hey," she said, "hope you don't mind the visit." Jack nodded. "Not at all, he's inside." She followed him into the barn, stopping short when she saw Shadow standing on his own, ears pricked toward her. "He looks good?" "Better," Jack said. "Still got a long way to go." She smiled softly. "You both do." He didn't respond, just scratched behind Shadow's ear, watching the horse close his eyes at the touch. Ellie cleared her throat and flipped her clipboard open. "So, listen, I brought someone with me." Jack tensed. "From the rescue center?" Yeah, she said. They want to see Shadow, just to check on him. I told you. I know, she cut in. I told them you wouldn't let him go. I didn't come to change your mind. A man stepped out from the passenger side of the truck. A tall figure in a field jacket, broad-shouldered, with a gentle calmness about him. He approached slowly, nodding politely to Jack before extending a hand. Name's Tom Reyes. I run the Wild Haven Sanctuary just across the Idaho line. We don't take horses away from people who've already saved them. I'm just here to talk. Jack shook his hand but said nothing. Tom glanced at Shadow. He's got that fire in him, the kind that doesn't go out easy. Yeah, Jack muttered. He's earned it. They sat on the porch after that, Jack, Ellie, and Tom, watching the light play off the muddy fields. For the first time, Jack opened up, just a little. He told them about the flood, about dragging Shadow out, about the moment he thought they'd both drown. He didn't talk about Anna, but Ellie didn't push. She just listened. When the conversation dipped into silence, Tom cleared his throat. I've seen a lot of rescues, Jack, a lot of horses pulled from fire, flood, starvation. But this bond you've got with him, it's rare. You should build something with it. Jack looked up. Build what? A place, Tom said. Not just for him, for others like him. Injured Mustangs, abandoned colts, hell, even retired ranch horses. You know how to fight for them. That's more than most can say. Jack didn't answer right away. That night, after they left, he stood beside Shadow under the stars, the cool air wrapping around them like a quilt of quiet. He thought about everything Ellie and Tom had said, about Anna, about all the people he hadn't saved, and the one horse he did, and maybe that was the whole point. By morning, the decision was made. Jack drove into town and returned with lumber, feed, and fencing supplies. He made phone calls to ranchers, vets, and former colleagues who owed him favors. Word spread fast through the valley. Within days, people began showing up, quiet folks with warm hands and tired hearts, ready to help rebuild. The fences went up first, then the new barn. Ellie returned with 2 horses rescued from the edge of the flood, one half blind, the other with a fractured leg. Jack took them both. He hung a sign at the entrance. Nothing fancy, just a plank of weathered wood burned with 3 words, Second Wind Sanctuary. Shadow watched from the hillside as the first trailer rolled in. Jack stood beside him, hand resting on the Mustang's shoulder. You ready for company? Jack asked. Shadow didn't answer, of course, but he didn't move away either. Weeks passed, then months. The sanctuary grew. People came, kids from foster homes, veterans from the nearby base, even a woman who used to ride but hadn't touched a saddle since her accident. They brushed the horses, fed them, talked to them. Some cried, some just sat in silence, all of them healed, little by little. Jack healed too. He still had nights when he woke in a sweat, heart racing from memories he couldn't shake. But now, when he stepped outside, there was laughter in the air. There were hoofbeats on the dirt. And there was Shadow, always nearby, always watching. One crisp autumn morning, Jack took Shadow for a walk along the riverbank. The water had calmed, running smooth over the stones. Jack stopped at the bend where it all began, the place where the Mustang should have died, and he should have drowned. Shadow came to a halt beside him, his ears flicking toward the sound of the current. Jack reached out, brushing his hand over the horse's neck. We pulled each other out of that river, he said quietly. I thought I was saving your life. Turns out, you were saving mine. Shadow didn't move. He just stood there, strong and quiet. And together they walked home,